You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gerd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-commerce strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode. This episode is sponsored by Centre & Greben. More about them later. Another cracking episode for you all today. We are talking to the product director at World of Books, who've recently handled a large-scale migration transformation. Pick the words as you like. But for those of you who don't know World Books, they are a PE-backed global retailer of used books. I think it's over a couple of $100 million global sales. So really large-scale DC, and they've got an extensive product catalogue that you expect from a leading retailer of books, and we'll get into the size of that later. And the reason why we want to have a chat today with our guest, David Magee, is that they've recently migrated across to Shopify, moving to SaaS. So moving to SaaS Enterprise, this is an area that I think is growing, the number of global enterprise brands that are taking SaaS seriously. But doing this with such a massive catalogue of SKUs, it's very challenging. So before we get into the questions, a warm welcome, David. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, James and Paul. Great to be here. Good to talk.
Before we start getting into the details of the project, do you want to give people a flavour for who you are, what you do?
Yeah, would love to. So, David Magee, the product director for World of Books. In terms of the business itself, the clue's in the name, really. We're in the books business. In terms of our goal and our aspiration as a business, we're aiming to be the world's largest and most sustainable dedicated online bookstore. What we're super excited about, and in my role in particular, is working out, how do we use technology? How can we use technology to find ways to allow our customers to have really great experiences when they read more and waste less? To give you a little bit of sense of scale, maybe just to build on a couple of the points that you made a moment ago, James, both from an organization and platform perspective. We've got 3 sites in the UK, 1 in the US and 1 in Hungary. And then in terms of the product itself, we've got more than 10 million books in physical inventory. Most of those are individual SKUs. And we have some quite complex ways of working in our technology around, for example, dynamic repricing. So we do repricing maybe 5 million products per day. So it's a pretty complex, fast-moving e-commerce business, but an exciting place to be.
Perfect. I think that's a really good intro, and that takes us nicely on to the first question. So obviously everything you talked about there are things that you maybe wouldn't naturally associate with a Shopify-based tech stack. And historically you worked with, I guess, a broader stack, different approach. So what led to you move into Shopify? What were the main challenges, or what were the main things that motivated you suddenly to Shopify or a SaaS platform with James? So.
Yeah, great question. I'll answer it in 2 parts. So the first part is kind of the strategic context for World of Books, and the second part are the quite specific challenges that we were facing. So World of Books originated as a business that sold on marketplaces. So World of Books was selling on eBay, Amazon, Abe, Libris, all sorts of different third-party marketplaces. And that's how the business really grew originally in the UK. But over the last number of years, we've been pushing really hard into the direct-to-consumer space, launched our own website, and started to try and take more ownership of the full end-to-end customer experience. And that really helps us from a brand building perspective, and also reduces some of the commercial risk around marketplace fees. For example, if they move significantly, that had a really big and painful impact on our business. So from a strategic perspective, moving into direct to consumer is the direction we really want to go, and that's where we're growing. We really had 2 main challenges with our legacy tech stack. So firstly, we had a really rapidly rising total cost of ownership. We were coming to the end of our contract with the legacy provider, and we were quoted, I think, maybe a 3x cost increase in our fee. And that kind of gave rise to the conversation, should we think about doing something else? Now, in fairness to our legacy provider there, They did tell us that we were making, I think, 250 million to 250 million API calls per week. So we were actually costing them money to support. So there's some real complexity there. And I think, that was definitely one of the things that kicked this off. Why that was important for us is that part of our value proposition is that we support kind of value-seeking book lovers. And if our cost base dramatically increases, it makes it a lot harder for us to support that part of the proposition. So that was part one, total cost of ownership. And then part two really is we just had an inability to develop the product or to make for more engaging customer experiences. Most of our team was tied up in supporting that legacy tech stack, fixing legacy integrations. And we really hadn't done anything over the last maybe 2 years to innovate the product, but actually do anything for the customer that might make the book buying experience better. So yeah, those are the two primary things. Obviously, moving to Shopify, it kind of gives us some limitations at the same time. If you're on a different tech stack, you might have the ability to customize anything. But at the same time, what we were really excited for was moving to Shopify with very quick access to a big ecosystem. So a lot of their apps, for example, in the Shopify store, whether that's for loyalty or subscription or maybe integrated A/B testing or maybe launching a mobile app. Those are things that we could quite quickly get off the ground with Shopify and understand how they did or didn't work for our customer and for the business. Whereas on the legacy tech stack, that kind of innovation was months or years worth of development. So yeah, to summarize that, reducing total cost of ownership and enabling product innovation were the two primary drivers.
Grab and create digital flagship stores for iconic brands of today and tomorrow. We are the #1 Sentra agency in the world, with more than 50 Sentra implementations to date. We are also e-commerce design specialists, platform and tech partner agnostic. Try our new e-commerce design subscription. Visit grebin.com.
That makes sense. And you mentioned, so far we've talked about catalog, the dynamic pricing side, and there's obviously a number of other areas that are complex around the business. But the other thing that's not unique about your business that I was surprised about when we first spoke was that you're using a single instance of Shopify and markets. And as part of that, you've had access to some betas and everything else. But there's amongst those things, we'll come on to that a bit more later, but amongst those things, there's, a lot of things that in theory could and should challenge Shopify. So can you talk us through kind of the process and kind of how you went through the migration and how you handled some of those compromise areas and kind of other hurdles you faced?
For sure. Let me talk through the process that we kind of went through from a migration standpoint, and then stop me at any point if there's somewhere you want to go a bit deeper. But we just started really with discovery. So we spent quite a lot of time talking to our customers about what they liked about our current site and platform and what they didn't like and what could be improved. Did a bunch of teardowns of competitor sites and competitor user experience. And just built some kind of best practice and some mock-ups and designs for what we thought we could do potentially with Shopify to help us go on and build on that solution. We looked at a variety of different platforms and just kind of tried to trade off cost, which is a driver for us, ecosystem and support, and scalability. And Shopify just came out as the candidate that we thought was the most likely to work for us. The Shopify team, in fairness to them, are really great. They engaged with us really, really well. They set us up throughout their organization, gave us a bunch of different points of contact, and really invested time in trying to understand us. The markets piece was a challenge as well. We're pretty early to markets for a business of our size and scale. But one of, if we think back to some of the challenges we were trying to avoid, the total cost of ownership piece, if we'd gone with the expansion stores and the kind of customization and localization, and then the support and maintenance of those stores was something we thought, let's try and avoid if we can. I also think Shopify were pretty keen to get us on markets because it's a great case study for them. So even if there were some limitations, maybe we didn't even realize those at the time until we actually pushed further into working on the market. But from a migration phasing perspective, then we went through discovery. We then kind of built out the front end. So just designing and building the site on Shopify. it'll become a bit more clear when we talk about it later. But one of the key things that we did there was we built the site, we designed the site in such a way that we tried to make it almost identical to our legacy site from a customer experience perspective. So that was really frustrating in one regard because we wanted to do something with better and more exciting and more interesting for our customers. But when it came to A/B testing, we wanted to have the two as close as possible in terms of design. So we replicated the site in Shopify, and the only major change was around performance. If you, from a core web vitals perspective, it was actually better, but we were aiming for kind of design, look and feel parity from a customer perspective on the legacy stack. And then probably the largest piece of work overall was actually back-end work. So we built custom middleware in-house. And if you think about the middleware as kind of the pipe work that takes all the data from our data warehouse and transforms that and prepares that in a way that's suitable for Shopify and Shopify appropriate. So all the work around product creation, product updates, stock, inventory, and price updates, that all flows through our middleware, kind of millions and millions of events per day. And that really got us to the point where we had a tech stack. We had the front end built, we had a back end through our middleware, and then we moved into the piece around A/B testing, and then into kind of actually migrating the stores through redirects and the Google Shopping feed as well. So that's kind of, I guess, the overall outline.
Centra is the only commerce platform built exclusively for fashion brands. Over 300 fashion brands run on Centra, including icons like Paul Smith, Jeff, Avenue, and Nudie Jeans. Centra solves business logic challenges for fashion brands like no other platform, and they are on a mission to help you scale up rapidly, globally, across all online and offline channels. Take your fashion brand global, faster, further, stronger today.
Question on the custom middleware, because that's really interesting, because I think a lot of the time people go down quite standardized routes to middleware. Patchworks is very strong in the Shopify ecosystem. Then there are other enterprise stacks out there, but often people underestimate the cost when you start to get the sheer volume of events like you guys got. Was cost based on the volume the driver for custom, or was it more about control?
Yeah, this is actually an interesting part, and this was one of our key failings and learnings throughout the migration, which was that we started with a third-party iPaaS provider. That's how the project started, and we spent probably 6 months working with that provider on building an integration from our data warehouse through their iPaaS into Shopify. And we got to the point where we couldn't get confidence in the data that was appearing in Shopify. So partly due to some challenges in the data quality at our end, and also just the sheer volume of changes that we're going through. So we actually ended up abandoning that after 6 months. That cost us a lot of time and money. And we made the decision that we would build our own middleware in-house. In hindsight, it's so obvious that we should have done that from the get-go. We've got a big, got a tech team of 80 people, front end, back end, full stack. We understand our own systems and our own data better than anybody else. We thought we would be able to do it faster and not distract our team by going to a third party, and that didn't work out for us. So that if I was going to point to anything in the project that was a failing, it was our initial choice and us going down the route for the third party, iPaaS. But then the major success was what we actually built in terms of middleware is super capable, very high observability, so we know what's going on throughout all stages of those transformations, and really reliable. So it's been a massive improvement as an end result, but we probably wasted six months and easily 6 figures in cost originally.
Do you know what? I think this is really interesting. I love the transparency on this, because we, between us, we worked across so many different projects and nothing goes 100% smoothly. And sometimes you see a decision in hindsight as, why did we do that? But actually, in the time, you were doing it for the right reasons. I'd love to know, how did you get the buy-in to like pivot? Because that's a really hard, not just financial decision, but an emotional decision in a project, because you've invested so much time that the impact that can have on people's motivations is significant. So how did you get the buy-in so people go, right, fine, let's just burn it and go?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was really hard, and also very hard in every sense. Hard for the product team, the project teams, hard for business stakeholders, hard for the CFO. He wasn't very happy. But we got to the point really where we had a couple of things from a commercial perspective that were looming. So we had a deadline for getting off our old legacy tech stack and significant cost implications if we couldn't get off that on time. And we also had an opportunity cost, which was that we believed Shopify would convert much better for us and deliver better customer experience. So when you kind of combine both of those things, that the potential cost that was looming on the horizon if we didn't go live was enormous. So we gave it a couple of extra months. We had a go live deadline. That passed. We weren't confident in what we were seeing from a product data perspective. We gave it a couple of months of trying, fixing, collaborating. Can we make this work? Can we get this data to a point where we're really confident in it? And transparently, part of the challenge with that was that because the data volumes are so high, it could take you days and days and days to upload the full catalog, and only then do you really discover that you've got problems. So you then spend time fixing them, clearing the catalog, re-uploading the catalog. So part of the nature of the challenge was that the system that had been integrated just wasn't fast enough to be able to fix problems at our scale quickly. But to come back to your question, I spoke to a bunch of people in the organization. My peer in engineering, Joel, our engineering director, we were aligned, and we just got junior stakeholders together and said, this is not going to work. We don't have confidence in this. As product director, I'm not going to put this in front of our customers because I think it'll be a terrible experience. I don't think it'll deliver business results. I think we can build the middleware in-house. This is how we think we do it. We kind of got the go. So that was super painful, a really hard period, painful decision. And then, we just stood up. We pulled in people from different product teams with the right skills, took people off other platforms, other projects that they're working on, built kind of the elite team within World of Books from a tech and development standpoint. And people worked 70, 80-hour weeks for months to build it and to get it live. So a very, very challenging time within the organization. But the end product in terms of what they delivered is pretty phenomenal.
Great. It's really interesting. I'm sure James and I can pick your brain on that for a long time, but maybe we'll do a follow-up episode or something one day. The next question. So I think the other thing that I found really interesting about your project, and something that comes up a lot and that is notoriously difficult to do for one and is often contentious, is the idea of testing one site versus another site. And you achieved this by Cloudflare. So can you kind of talk us through how you approach that from a technical standpoint, and then also from like a business standpoint in terms of process to determine the winner, etc.?
Totally. Yeah. So from a let me start with the business standpoint, because that helps inform it. But what we were really nervous about was that we would design, build and launch a new site, and then it wouldn't actually convert as well as, or almost in some cases at all. So at our scale, where we've got hundreds of thousands of sessions per day, fluctuation in conversion is really meaningful for us. So we really wanted to find a way to understand, how does this site perform? How does this full tech stack perform in comparison to the legacy site? In part to validate the Shopify proposition. We always thought that through Shopify, with their great checkout experience and Shop Pay, we would see a conversion increase. That was kind of what we built into the original business case based on some assumptions. But we actually were really nervous about just turning it on and finding that we're actually losing money every day in comparison to the legacy site. So that was the impetus for us. We were helped from a technical standpoint in that we were changing domains. So we were trading originally on our legacy tech stack on wob.com, and we built the new site on worldofbooks.com. So that was, I think, one of the enablers for us that meant that we could use Cloudflare. We used Cloudflare workers to split traffic 50-50 between the two sites. We then, cookied those visitors to try and make sure that they stayed on the site that they visited. And kind of coming back to the design and the front end piece, we wanted it we wanted it to be as imperceptible as possible to customers, because we knew that if customers were landing on a new site, a different site, that was very likely to change their purchase behavior. So we thought, let's build a site that's as close as possible to the legacy site, but 10-50% of traffic. Let's put a whole bunch of measurement in place. So we were able to measure all the way from not just sessions and page views, but search usage, click-through rates, add to carts, checkout completion, conversion rate, and so on, and just really understand kind of top to bottom within the e-commerce funnel how the legacy tech stack is performing in comparison to the new Shopify builds. And then if there were issues, we'd hopefully know where to focus. If we had problems if search wasn't working, or if we had problems around any particular aspect of the funnel, we could make changes, rerun the A/B tests, and hopefully see that those had been improved. But ultimately, what we were aiming for was to give our organization confidence that we could migrate all of our traffic to the new platform, and it wasn't going to hurt us financially.
Yeah, I love that. It's actually quite a rarity now for people to be able to, but B, make sure they take the time to do that level of validation because of time pressures. And often those time pressures are linked into contractual terminations. Yeah. So yeah, really interesting to hear that. I'm sure there's probably a lot of e-com folk out there where that piques their interest instantly. What question I've got, because Paul and I kind of roles they complement each other, but they vary quite significantly in projects. And I do a lot more of kind of hands-on, like project leadership, project management stuff. And I'm always interested by project team structures because they vary massively. You talked about having a large internal engineering function across the stack, but how else did you structure it? Was it fully run internally, apart from like a dev agency? Did you bring in any contract resources to run a project management office? How did you structure that, and who were the key project roles?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the running of the project was World of Books internal. So it was split between me as the product director and my peer in engineering, Jolt, who's our engineering director. So I guess ran the product and delivery side, and Jolt ran the kind of engineering and technical side. We did bring in a third party on state to do front end development for us, largely not because we don't have front end developers ourselves, but because we don't know anything about Shopify. So there was an opportunity for us to watch and learn and pair with them as they built the site, and always with the goal of offboarding them eventually and taking overall control of our own site and being in charge of our own destiny was always the plan. But that was the main contract resource that we used. But in terms of running the team itself, we had everything you would imagine, I suppose, from a project delivery perspective around a steering group that we would report to on a monthly basis in terms of overall progress and budget and financial controls, and whether we were on track or not. And then we just ran pretty standard ceremonies around sprint planning, grooming, refining, daily stand-ups, and just stayed as close as possible to the technical team. I think one of the other kind of big learnings that came out of that was, particularly for me and Jolt, and comes back a little bit to the decision around the iPaaS piece. We certainly learned the hard way that as leaders in the organization, we need to be directly and intimately involved in a lot of the detail of what's happening. And we weren't at the start, and that was a mistake. And that was a miss on our part, and we need to own that. But I think from a product perspective, just getting really, really close to essentially every decision that we're making and understanding why and what that might mean for the business and for the customer was super important for us.
Right. And I guess the big question, so you talked about having 10 million SKUs earlier, and I'd imagine I have seen some stores exist with that level of catalog in the past in the Shopify ecosystem, but maybe not with your other complexities and the volume as well. So it's typically being like car parts, retailers and things like that. But I guess it sounds like you've got a back office system or something else that isn't a PIM that's housing a lot of that data. But how did you approach the catalog migration? And how did you find the localization side as well? So I think you're multi-language. Those two stuff.
Yeah, great question. So we manage all of the data in, as you said, kind of our own proprietary backend systems. So we have what we call a data warehouse, where we take product data from a bunch of different sources and merge that into a kind of a complete set that we then pass through the middleware into Shopify. So in some ways, it's relatively simple because what we focus on is making sure that the product data that we're ingesting into the data warehouse is correct. And then the middleware will just pass through whatever we ask it to Shopify. The only real kind of technical constraints that we ran into there were just around API limits. So firstly, we're picking the right API, right endpoint with Shopify. And then just making sure that we had a good and a clear schedule in place for product uploads. All of the localization that we're doing is done in the front end. So it's relatively limited in comparison to what we could do if we had a PIM. A PIM was one of the considerations that we had at the start of the project, and we spent some time working with the guys at Akinio. Really like those guys, really like the product, and I think over time that's the kind of platform that could really enable us from a growth and scale perspective. We just couldn't afford from a time perspective to include integrating with a PIM in the scope of this project, given the schedule we were working to. So what we've ended up with is a bit of a mismatch is too harsh, but we're partly managing the product data in our own data warehouse and then partly doing the kind of customization, localization piece on the front end. So that's definitely an area where over the next 6 or 9 months, we want to try and understand how we can improve. It's relatively manual at the moment.
As I warned you both before the start of this episode, I have run out of battery, or nearly. So I'm just quickly migrating somewhere that's got a plug. But one sub question on that. So I think Algolia plays a really important role within your stack. And one of the big limitations that I thought you'd be facing would be around category merchandising, which is something that isn't great with markets at the moment. So how have you approached that, and how have you found Algolia with such a big catalog?
Yeah, great question, Paul. So Algolia is a fundamental part of how our site operates. So Algolia provides our on-site search experience, and it also provides recommendations and collections. So we build those through Algolia. It does mean that we have an absolutely enormous record count with Algolia. When you think about all of the different indexes and all of the different markets and languages, I can't remember what the total figure was, but I think it's around 65 million or something like that when you take all of the products and you apply them in a localized way. But you're absolutely right. Algolia sits at the heart of that. We've got a whole bunch more we can even do with Algolia. We're barely scratching the surface of that product's capability, particularly from a search perspective. So we've set the search up in such a way that it largely replicates what we had on legacy, where we used Algolia as well. But there's a ton more we can do around kind of search relevancy testing and making sure that we customers really find the books they're looking for through that vast catalog. But Algolia is a fundamental part of our stack at the moment.
And on the international front, they touched on it earlier about you operate globally. You've got English language sites, you've got foreign language sites, and that's always fun to get the right hierarchy structure and to get the right setup for and managing them independently and having inheritances where you need it. And you went, quite early to markets for such a big global store. So what I'd love to hear is nothing's ever perfect in any platform. What have been the compromises you've had to make around international by going down the market street?
Yeah, a few things. I think that dependence or that link between making sure you know exactly what store you're updating when you make changes. That sounds so trivial, but actually that can cause a few more headaches when you have a large team working on updating something on the platform. I think a few of the technical challenges that we found were things that we definitely didn't expect, which were, and Paul and I have talked about this offline over the last couple of months, but we found that Shopify actually do sometimes have a challenge landing visitors in the right market. So based on our IP address, they're not always consistent and reliable with that. So there's some unexpected behavior. We get that on sometimes a second visit. Sometimes a customer doesn't land on the market we'd expect. But at the moment, we find that around 2% of our customers, for example, in the US, are not landing on the US storefront when they click through. So there is something within markets on the Shopify redirect side that maybe over time will be optimized. We also were caught out a little bit by the way Shopify sets up primary markets. So within Shopify markets, you can have lots of different markets, but you have to allocate one as your primary. We didn't appreciate that market only ships to itself. So the way World of Books has worked historically is that the UK is our largest market, and the UK ships essentially to the rest of the world, aside from our other markets. So, we have Germany, France, Australia, the US, and Switzerland. The UK would ship everywhere else, but we couldn't do that on Shopify. So we ended up making the US our primary market, which only ships then to the US. So we definitely had, quite a lot of rework to do just from a configurations perspective relative to what we were expecting and shipping rates and pricing. And then the third piece, which I think was, really interesting for us, but also, quite challenging as well, was the multi-currency and multi-entity piece. As we have two entities, two legal entities, and we transact in 4 different currencies, managing that through Shopify markets in a way that's efficient and reduces kind of foreign exchange cost exposure, I think has historically been quite hard for large enterprises. And yeah, that's an area where we had to kind of work through in some detail with Shopify, because the solution that was on offer until very recently was going to be super painful for us.
Yeah, let's come back to a minute, because I'm really intrigued by this, because I've not worked with, I've actually seen that it's there and been looking forward to it for a while, but not worked on a project with it. But that interesting you said about markets is I mean, Paul obviously has a better technical handle of the platform in detail than I do, but that issue with the base store on markets, I came across on a project recently where it hadn't been understood, and it led to a sudden, last minute, well, we need an English language version for an international, or we need an English language version. Otherwise, the German subdirectory is not going to be set up properly. And then it created lots of issues with language files and having to re-import. And it's amazing how you don't know there's a problem until you know there's a problem sometimes.
Yeah. It's totally right. And one of the challenges I think for people thinking about migrating to Shopify or any other platform is there are exactly as you say, you don't know what you don't know, and there are things that can become quite important parts of your business or your ways of working that you just assume will be in place on a new platform, and they're not. So how will you then adapt to that, either in terms of changing your working practice or changing the customer experience? It is quite challenging. And there's also just no way to get an answer to all of that. That's one of the things we really wrestled with in the migration. We kind of set out some core fundamental requirements. This is what we want the platform to do. But you always miss something. It touches so many parts of the business, and that there's no way to get that absolutely perfectly right every time. And we definitely got caught out by that for sure. But I think, net, the overall position is a really good one. You do have to make some compromises along the way.
Yeah, and I think it's a really pragmatic approach to have, because when you're working at any scale, whether it's a single channel business or a large global business like yourself, you're working with people in technology, and we're all flawed. And at some point, you'll find something in the project that is a bump that you weren't expecting. And the projects that succeed are the ones that are proactive in handling it and don't turn it into a blame culture and go, right, okay, that didn't go right. How do we fix it? So it's really nice to hear that, because I think it gives other people a bit of reassurance that when they have problems, do you know what? It's not because you cocked up. This is nature of a complex project.
Yeah, totally true. And I think the other thing that plays into that's super important, and it kind of comes back to the A/B testing piece as well, is that a lot of people adopt a very project management approach to these kind of deliveries. But I think thinking a bit more about a product management piece where we build, we measure, and we learn really helps with those, with overcoming some of those challenges. So let's actually build something, let's test it, let's see whether it works or not, and then adapt. So I think if you assume from the start that you understand everything fully and you kind of specified all the requirements, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. It just won't be that way. Too complex. There are too many moving parts.
And in terms of, so let's come back to that multi-entity and the local payout bit, because you're right, the avoidance of FX fees is big. And that was previously a big limitation around markets. How have you found it? Because it's beta. It's not like it's been around for years. It's just relatively new. So how have you found it? Are there, and any advice to other people who are considering going down this route?
Definitely. So we ended up getting here via a slightly tenuous route. So we had asked Shopify for this feature maybe a year ago when we were kind of in early talks with them. And it was always on the roadmap. It was meant to come at the end of last year. It was meant to come early 2024, spring 2024, and it never landed. So what Shopify said to us was actually sign with Adyen, your massive payment provider. Shopify built an integration with Adyen, recommended us to move to Adyen and say, look, you can have the multi-currency and multi-entity integration through Adyen. That will work for you. So we went through that long process. We did all the contract stuff. We spent a lot of money with Adyen, signed contracts, and we actually went to push it live with Adyen on a call together, and we couldn't get it to work. We went back to Shopify and we said, hey, help us out. What's going on here? And they said, we've changed our minds. You can't use that integration anymore. But we are building it a multi-entity and multi-currency on ShopPay. It's not ready, but we'll let you have that as soon as we possibly can. So super difficult conversation there. We'd spent a lot of time and money, and there were quite significant kind of financial implications for us if that didn't work out. So thankfully, the way it then eventually worked out was really good in that Shopify brought us into that product development from a feature perspective. So we got to join calls with their product manager, their product teams, their engineers. They really wanted to understand how our business worked. They really wanted to get feedback from us in terms of how their designs and how their interface was shaping up. And then once that was ready, they kind of onboarded us together. We collaborated on getting onboarded to that and testing that live in anger. So yeah, the end result was a really good one. We'd actually always wanted to use ShopPay because I think as kind of a wallet, it's a really good customer experience, and there certainly does seem to be some good data that suggests that it improves conversion as well. So on one hand, we were quite disappointed we couldn't use that. We were going to Adyen, so at least we'd have express checkout, but not with ShopPay. The rug was pulled out from under us on the Adyen pull out from us and Adyen, and then we were able to kind of collaborate with Shopify on ShopPay.
That's certainly not the first time I've heard of that type of situation. It's an interesting position those two are in at the moment. So the next question, and one that I find particularly interesting, is Shopify Enterprise. So that was announced about a year ago. It's never really been clear around what it is and where professional services sits within it, and then what it means, things like API rate limits and everything else. Yeah. And I think it's also not completely clear as to when a merchant falls into it automatically versus being paid for it. So you've now signed up to Shopify Enterprise. Can you talk us through why you wanted it and how it's going to work for you?
Totally. So we signed up, as you'd imagine, to Plus. Originally, we didn't even know that Enterprise existed. I think Shopify were kind of branding something around commerce components, I think they called it originally, but it didn't feel like a strong play from them. And we really didn't have, too many conversations about it at all during our kind of onboarding or at the start of the product development piece. But Shopify actually brought it to us a couple of months ago. And I think this is, from Shopify's perspective, they're trying to push into the enterprise space. Like, that's obvious. They built out from supporting, small SMEs, and now onboarding complex enterprise businesses is the play they want to make. We were interested in it for a couple of reasons. Really around the increased API rate limits. The Plus rate limits were sufficient for us on a day-to-day basis, but not if we were doing really large transactions. They slowed us down. So if we're kind of re-uploading a whole catalog, for example, or very significant percentages of a catalog that we would run into those rate limits. We'd have to schedule those updates. So increased API limits were really key for us. They double on enterprise in comparison to Plus. We also were really keen to get a technical account manager. During our onboarding process, we had access to a solutions architect at Shopify who worked really closely with us for probably 6 months. And because we don't really have any, we don't have a background in Shopify at all, we found that super powerful. Somebody that could problem solve with us and just bring technical platform understanding. So having that as part of enterprise has been really important for us too. And then one of the selling points into the business, particularly from like a CFO's perspective, was that with enterprise there are SLAs, those service level agreements, and kind of credits for downtime, for example. So your business feels more protected than it did when we were just on Plus. So there's a whole kind of laundry list of things that are different on enterprise to Plus, some of which are more applicable for omni-channel or businesses that have a greater emphasis in retail, which we don't. But if I was going to call the 3 things out that stand out as being really important for us: increased API rate limits, technical account management, and then the SLAs around uptime. I think, to be honest, it was never made really that clear to us exactly what the thresholds were for saying your business is now eligible for enterprise. Shopify just brought it to us and said, we're developing an enterprise proposition. We have an early bird offer for you that makes it significantly cheaper than it might otherwise be. And here are the benefits. So yeah, that worked well for us. I think I've heard 125 million USD GMV being floated around as like an entry requirement for it, but I've never actually seen that written down or confirmed.
Yeah, there's a lot of different rumors around that, I would say, and I hear different things from different clients and things with Shopify, but I think that's pretty much where they're headed.
Yeah, I think that's about right. But they never told us that. They just said, would you like to move to enterprise? And the other thing I would say is I think they try to integrate enterprise clients more closely into their senior organization. So they connected us with the enterprise CTO from a tech standpoint too. So I think with Plus, you're kind of kept a little bit of arm's length. It feels like on support issues, you get to raise tickets and talk to chat like everybody else. But on enterprise, I think they try to bring you in a bit closer to the overall organization. And I think, given that our complexity, that's really helpful for us.
Yeah, and from a vendor's perspective, that level of connectivity, it's basically as man market or people marketing at each level of your business. As a merchant, you have a counterpart in the vendor that builds longer term relationships and keeps you in the fold for longer. I mean, that exactly is smart play.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the way it worked with us for enterprise was we were, let's say, 1 year into our Plus contract. They offered us another contract, essentially a renewal at the 1 year point rather than the 3 year point. So it works for Shopify too, because we're at least 1 year, we're going to stay with them for at least 1 year longer than we were currently contracted to. And it, also reduces our risk around maybe the fees for Plus go up next year or the year after or whenever we were due to renew. So yeah, it actually works out pretty beneficially for us overall.
Cool. And one final question for me is, we always like to do the retrospective when you've gone through something so monumentous as this, and you talked about the middleware piece. That's obviously a big, lessons learned. What are the other key takeouts or key things that you would want other people to hear about? What could be done differently, or what you would change if you ever had to go through it again? Hopefully you don't, because that's the whole point of building. I won't. You won't be everywhere. Yeah, exactly. But other people who are earlier on in a journey like yours.
Definitely. So I think probably 2 things stand out, and one would be definitely around changing the project mindset to build, measure, learn rather than big bang. So definitely a mistake of ours in our early thinking, which was we're just going to build something brand new, completely different. Customers will, of course, love it. Of course, it will work way better for the business. We're going to make loads of money. We kind of set off on this course where we were just doing something brand new. But I think bringing more of a kind of, I suppose it's an agile mindset where you say, well, actually, we're going to build something, we're going to measure it, we're going to test how it's working, we're going to learn and implement that feedback loop. I think trying to do that at any point possible in the migration is really helpful. So you actually can use real data to make decisions on rather than just gut or intuition. I think it would be great if the site looked like this. I think it would be great if this was what customer experience looked like. What we really tried to do was actually just build something and then see how it worked, and try to minimize that cycle time and just learn as fast as we possibly could. So that would be one: build, measure, learn where possible, and use data. The second piece is definitely coming down to the piece around partner selection, and in particular for us, it was around the iPath. And just truly challenging ourselves as to whether build or buy was the best thing to do, and whether the partners we had selected really had the technical chops to integrate with our business. And that's said not at all as a criticism of those partners who I think do amazing things for other merchants around the globe. But World of Books is just a uniquely difficult and complex business to work with. So I think partner selection is definitely a key part for us. And then the final bit, which is something I don't think we ever really cracked, is it's a hard nut to crack, but deciding at what point to pull the trigger from a migration perspective is really difficult. And this is not necessarily around the third party piece and replacing them and building our own middleware. This is actually around, when do you launch the site? When have you done enough so that customers won't have a bad experience? Maybe it's not the experience you want in an end state. Maybe it's not a perfect experience, but deciding at what point you have enough in place that the customer experience is good enough and the business results will also be good enough too is really hard. And we definitely didn't get that right all the time. So for example, during the A/B test, there were features on the new site that just were not available to our existing customers that they would find on the old site. So we had challenges around account activation, bringing like the accounts over and activating those reliably. When you're A/B testing one storefront over another, wish lists are a big part of our business. Wish lists with different customers didn't necessarily like that. So I think just listening to customer feedback, taking that on board, and then working out how to make the right decision at the right time to say, yes, we're going to migrate. It's imperfect, but at this point, we just have to pull the trigger and then we'll fix forward. That was something that we probably had a few hiccups with and maybe didn't always get the right call. We maybe erred sometimes on the side of speed and getting things across the line, and probably sacrificed quality to some extent, sacrificed customer experience maybe on occasion. And I think we probably should have done better on some of those choices.
It's such a hard decision path because it's the classic triangle of cost, speed, and like performance quality. And whichever one you focus on the most creates a compromise in at least one of the others. And there's no perfect answer to this, is there? Because I have clients who are, it's about a day and therefore it's velocity. But you realize that you've cut a few corners subconsciously, like in QA or UAT. And then you get these knock-on effects, and it's very hard to know which one to go for.
It's so true. And James, one of the only things that we found helpful in that was just deciding what good looked like, deciding what success looked like, and kind of trying to unite the whole team around that. So, for example, in the A/B test, we obsessed over conversion. We didn't say all we care about is conversion rate, but kind of all we cared about was conversion rate. And if conversion rate is equal to or better than the legacy site, we press go. And I think that kind of clarity, it can be massively helpful sometimes. And a lot of the time when you've got different competing opinions, finance want this to happen, engineering want obviously the best quality possible, product is thinking about the customer and the customer experience, getting agreement around what good looks like. And ideally that being one core measurable metric is massively powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good ending point, because I could I know Paul I could ask you hundreds more questions. I'm fascinated. I think it's you've obviously got a huge amount of experience, and it's a really interesting project. So I definitely would love to follow up at some point and find out more. But David, really appreciate you coming on. It's been a really interesting episode, so thank you.
No, it's been great. It's been almost like therapy, talking some things through. So yeah, James and Paul, thank you both very much for having me. It's been great.
We need to start charging because we're therapists now.
Yeah.
So there must be a minimum hourly rate for that. But look, everyone who's listening, I hope you've really enjoyed it as well, because it's a cracking topic. Do reach out. We'll put David's link on the landing page if you want to reach out and connect with him on LinkedIn. But keep your ears peeled for next week's episode. Take care, everybody.
You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gerd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-commerce strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.